you'll start out as a fan. I think everybody does when you're looking at online education and you haven't quite gotten into this world yet. You're a fan of, maybe people like myself or people you see on Drumeo or people that just have high production levels. You see that and go, man, that's awesome. But if you want to be a participant in that world, if you want to be an entity and a company within that world, well, you have to disengage from that fan mentality, because fans, you want to buy the things they have. You look to them for inspiration. But if you're starting a company, well, you have to start from scratch. That you can't make your favorite online educator your number one source for inspiration if you're trying to be an online educator, right? So I think stepping out of that fan territory was something that I had to go through, and I'm watching more and more people start to realize that you can't fanboy your way into an entrepreneurial space when there's other entrepreneurs doing that same thing. You just have to come from a totally different area.
Today our guest is Meinl cymbals artist Adam Tuminaro, also known as the Orlando Drummer. Adam runs a very successful online drum education site called orlandodrummer.com, where for an ongoing fee, one can have access from all of their devices to over 250 video lessons, over 150 practice loops, and over 6 hours of interviews with some of the world's best drummers. His lessons are broken down into 3 different ways to learn: by a single lesson, by a lesson pack with multiple lessons covering a concept, and by masterclass, which are in-depth 1-hour lessons. His huge library of loops is filtered by genre and tempo, so finding the right music to practice to is a snap. Such a comprehensive and well-mapped-out, thoughtful educational site is no surprise once you get to know Adam. Adam has been with Meinl cymbals since April 2015, just over 3 years now, and he and I have come to know each other pretty well during that time. Just like his online business, it seems that everything that Adam engages in is thoroughly researched and carefully considered. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean contrived. My impression is that Adam leaves very little to chance and instead chooses to be as informed and as ready as possible in all facets of his life. I could be wrong, but that's the impression that I get. That way of being is my theory as to why Adam has done so well for himself with orlandodrummer.com. A killer work ethic steeped in tenacity and an ability to always get along well with others has helped this drummer go very far. So we've brought Adam to Nashville to film some video content with Meinl, and we figured that while he was here, we would sit him down and do an interview for Meinl Radio. So, Adam, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you for having me, sir.
So, let's jump right into this.
Sure.
It seemed like for a while there that every drummer and their brother was trying to set up some form of online education.
Still going on a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically cash in on what they saw and what they thought was an easy payday. Now, the reality, as we know, is a lot different. It's not an easy payday.
Sure.
Do you feel like that rush to have an education platform has died down, or is it still growing?
I think it is still growing, for sure. I definitely see people making strides to get into online education that had never done that before, or people that just get an online following and then assume that the next logical step would be to get into online education. But what I've seen people start to internalize and start to figure out is that you can't replicate what's already been done. One thing that I know I'm guilty of was growing up watching Drumeo and Mike Johnston, and certainly thinking that, well, that's how it's done. These are the two big companies that are doing this thing, and that's how I should do it. And it did take me a while to figure out that you can't mimic what those people or those companies are doing. That just never works. So I defined my own lane within the online education community. And I think there was a long period where people didn't realize that. They assumed that if you had a fan base and you made lessons, people would buy them. But that's really just not true. So I think there are more and more people that are trying to get into online education, but it makes me happy to see them being more creative and more innovative as far as how they are releasing this content. What's the content about, and what makes you different from anybody else doing this thing? Because that you have to set yourself apart. Just having lessons in a fan base doesn't mean anything.
Dude, the crazy part is, and I'm probably going to catch some heat for saying this, but I've seen some people out there even mimic lighting and sconces.
Yeah.
I can't even believe I know the word sconces, but I have a wife who's a good interior decorator, so I know these things.
Sure.
Like sconces, lighting, what they put in frames on the walls and where they put it. I mean,
camera angles.
Dude, it's
you name it.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And at least one of these that I've seen do some mimicking, they were sort of on the front end of this back in the day, and so it's kind of weird to see that going on.
Yeah. Well, there was a transition that I had to make. You'll start out as a fan. I think everybody does when you're looking at online education and you haven't quite gotten into this world yet. You're a fan of, maybe people like myself or people you see on Drumeo or people that just have high production levels. You see that, go, man, that's awesome. But if you want to be a participant in that world, if you want to be an entity and a company within that world, well, you have to disengage from that fan mentality, because fans, you want to buy the things they have. You look to them for inspiration. But if you're starting a company, well, you have to start from scratch. That you can't make your favorite online educator your number one source for inspiration if you're trying to be an online educator, right? So I think stepping out of that fan territory was something that I had to go through, and I'm watching more and more people start to realize that you can't fanboy your way into an entrepreneurial space when there's other entrepreneurs doing that same thing. You just have to come from a totally different area.
So that makes me wonder, is there anybody outside of the drum education realm that you have looked to for inspiration? Maybe it's somebody who does vlogging, or I don't know about lessons maybe, but they give educational content online, and maybe it could be about fitness or weight loss. Or
it's funny you say fitness. Yeah, there are two specific places where I look for inspiration as far as content creation goes for things like YouTube. That would be the fitness industry for sure, and also the cosmetic industry, because both of those are just absolutely massive on YouTube. So if you're looking for a way to present information to someone, whether that be like a video style. For example, I did a video called 10 Keys to Advanced Drumming. That came from a video that I saw on one of the #1 YouTube fitness channels, which Athlean X. He had a video that was something to the effect of 10 keys to healthy shoulders. Right, and so that was a direct parallel. So that's where I go for most of the stuff. Also, the cosmetic industry is massive on YouTube, makeup tutorials and things like that. And I don't watch those videos, but if I need inspiration for a video style or just a template for something that I'm going to create, oftentimes I will go to those two particular sectors. But the other person that comes to mind is honestly Eric Improda, who has created, what was it called? The ADD drumming videos?
Right, the attention deficit drumming.
Yeah, that came from like skateboarding parts. Think about how you film a skate video, right? It's not just like you rehearsing this one crazy thing that you did like a drum cover would be. It's short clips of all of the best things that you do all slammed together, right? So he kind of helped me understand that there's really nothing wrong with going outside of the drum industry, especially the drum education industry, to look for those different video styles. It just helps you be a more creative content creator,
Dude, I think there's everything right with going outside of the industry.
Yeah, you have to at this point, right?
You have to, because it's all been done.
Yeah.
So as far as what you preach to students, prospective students, or just those who are drummers and fans of drumming in general, what has been the hardest bit of advice that you've given for you yourself to follow?
Ooh, that's a good one. So this is a little zoom out, a little more of a philosophical message. And that would be that as hard as this is, as much work as you have to put in, as many walls that you're going to run into, as expensive as it is to create the things that we do, as time consuming and financially challenging just to, pay your own bills while you're trying to do this, managing your time. With all of that stuff, you have to remember that nobody cares. No one is going to zoom in or sweep in. Mom and dad aren't coming in and say, "Oh, was that hard? Was that drum video hard to make?" Hey, it's okay. Let's sit and let's talk about it. What was so hard about it? What's going on with your finances? Let's see if we can figure out, how are we going to get you this next camera or this next microphone, or that video didn't do so well. What can we do about that? That person isn't real for the most part. And the weight is completely on your shoulders all the time. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and that's exactly what content creators are, you're an entrepreneur, everything is your fault. Everything is on your shoulders. And I preach that, but I still have to work through that myself, constantly. It's very easy to complain. That's the easiest thing to do. But it's also very easy to question your next move, to question your projects. Is this worth my time? And, you know, it's just different endeavors that you'll take on. And you have to just remind yourself that you are responsible for this entire entity that you're creating, whatever brand you're trying to do or whatever attention you're trying to bring to yourself. That's all on you, right? And you have no right to, you know, to complain and to sort of try and find comfort somewhere. None of that stuff matters. You have to be really strong, confident, and really independent in just making things happen. And I have to remind myself that really, really often, but that's also a piece of advice that I give to a lot of people that are either struggling or they lack the motivation or they just say, you know, I'm late to the game. How do I get into this? And the first thing I tell people is, well, it's going to be hard, but you got to suck it up and keep going, you know?
So that's interesting that the question I asked, I was actually talking about learning drums.
Okay, specific to drums.
No, but this is great. I mean, you actually answered an even broader question, which is totally cool because you kind of gave a look into the backside of what you do and what you have to face. So let's just say you're still always working to be a better drummer.
Sure.
And you have students that come to you and you give them lots of advice. And I'm sure that based off of the type of student you have, you might find yourself repeating this one bit of advice for one that you gave to the other because it's kind of like a template piece of advice.
Sure.
You know? So what's something that you have had to tell people time and time again, but as a learning drummer, you struggle with?
So for me, that would be the concept of permutation. And permutation, Benny Greb introduced it to me in the Language of Drumming DVD back in the day. And it's just the idea that you would mathematically shift a thing, like a note, through 16th notes. So you'd hit all the downbeats and then all the E's, all the ands, all the uhs. I'm sure a lot of people know what permutation is. But that concept can be applied to almost any rhythmic concept that you're studying, right? You can, you know, permutate accents with your bass drum inside of triplets. You can permutate you know, diddles within 30-second notes on the hi-hat with grooves with this particular, you know, ostinato on your kick drum. There are so many ways that the concept of permutation can be applied. And every time I choose to dive into permutation, it always unlocks something in my playing. It's that powerful of a mathematical system. So as much as I preach that, I still find myself like abandoning permutation and having some drummer ADD and going and practicing other things. But that rhythmic concept or that conceptual approach to practice, I think is one of the most important things that you could do. So I talk about it a lot and I rarely return to it. So I try to get myself back in the permutation world often.
So do you think that you abandon it because it's hard as hell or because, and is it just that you have bad ADD?
I think, to be honest, I get distracted by creating more than practicing. And that's a balance that I've had to work on, you know, quite a bit. I'm not done practicing drums, but I am to a point where in the front of my mind is always creating new content, whatever that content might be. So really, it's just a matter of reminding myself that I still need to practice. And I'm definitely guilty of going weeks at a time without actually studying or practicing anything because I'm so hyper-focused on a particular project. But when I do go to practice, I have to often remind myself, like, go through permutation. That's what works. That's what unlocks stuff every time without fail.
That makes total sense. So what was the point in your life where you realized you had a knack for education?
I don't know if there was one specific point, but I've been interested or drawn to education as long as I can remember. And I remember before drums, for me, it was skateboarding. Skateboarding was my main thing. And so when I was 14 or 15, I tried to start a skateboarding lessons business. You know, probably 14. Yeah, that sounds about right. And so there were kids in the neighborhood, younger kids. They were 10 or 12. And I would go and see. I was like, hey, man, ask your parents if I could give you, like, skateboarding lessons, you know. And that's how I started out. And then as I got into drums, I realized that teaching was just something that it never felt like work, ever. It never felt like work. So by the time I was 18, 19, I was out of college or graduated early. And I started teaching really young kids. And even though I didn't know much music theory, it's really easy to teach a 5-year-old how to play a basic rock beat. So that's where I started. But I think it's just that I love explaining things. I love trying to construct different analogies or just different sentences to try and get in someone's head. Because you can take the same concept and try and explain it to one person, and they totally understand it. But a different person or a different student, you could say the same words in the same order and it doesn't click. And to me, that was always such an interesting puzzle to just say, how can I rearrange this sentence? What's a different analogy that I can go with? And I'm hunting for that light bulb that goes off, in their head. And for me, there's a feeling that comes with that that's very similar to the high that you get from playing drums in front of people, or just that musical satisfaction. I'm sure different athletes experience that when they do certain maneuvers, or weightlifters when they thrust the bar over their head. I'm sure there's a lot of different fields where you could get that feeling, but I don't know. I just always got that feeling from exercising the ability to construct words and analogies and watching it click. You can see it in someone's eyes, and I go, oh yes, I solved that puzzle. That just always drew me in.
So this kind of leads me to my next question. How did you become so proficient at public speaking? Did you have a parent that just drove grammar home to you? Were you always just kind of naturally inclined towards your right brain? You did well in English in school and you sucked at math, or was it, what was it?
Yeah, I definitely did way better in English than math. Anything that was creative where I could use my own words, that definitely was much better. But public speaking is certainly a skill set. I don't know that anyone is born as like a phenomenal public speaker, and I wouldn't consider myself. Sorry, I really smacked that mic. It's probably going to be a click.
That's all right. We won't. You don't have to pay for it.
No, I just figured I clipped the audio for sure. So public speaking. Okay. So for me, public speaking was definitely not something that I was naturally good at growing up. I don't know that anyone is naturally good at it, but I did always gravitate towards writing and literature. I was never really a big reader, but I love to write. I always did really, really well in English, and I had no problem with linguistic creativity. That was always totally fine for me. But if you look back at some of my oldest YouTube videos or other content I've created back in the day, I was not that good at speaking on camera. But one of the things that prompted me to start practicing that and rehearsing the skill of speaking without messing up what you're saying was back in the early YouTube days when I would watch YouTube drum lessons, or really any type of tutorial or something on YouTube. I'm talking 2007, 8, and 9. I noticed how many people would start saying something and then they would say or but, or oh, what I meant to say was this thing. And I always had this thought, man, you're recording on a camera. Why wouldn't you just start over? Just do it again. It's not that hard. Just scrap that take you messed up and do another one. So ever since I started doing YouTube drum lessons, at least after I was a year or so in, that was one of my things. There's no excuse for this not to be perfect because I'm in control. I can just hit that record button, turn it off, and hit it one more time and start over. So I know it seems sometimes when you watch some of my YouTube lessons in particular, it seems like it's just very articulate and thought out. Well, yeah, it's because I spent an hour recording something that ends up being 4 minutes. So a lot of it is just, I'm a perfectionist when it comes to that stuff, because when I'm in complete control of what I'm saying, I'm going to keep saying it until it turns out flawless.
Well, thinking about your business, you live down in Florida. You're called the Orlando Drummer.
Yeah.
So I wondered, and maybe this question it's not relevant, but even though you could operate your business from virtually anywhere, and not that there is a central location for what you do, it's not like you go to one city and, there's all the online drum educators. Yeah. That would be funny if it was, But do you ever feel disconnected from any kind of drum scene being down in Florida?
A bit, yeah. So one of my only drum buddies in Orlando was actually Devin Sumner, who's a Meinl artist. And Devin and I, he used to live there. We used to drum all the time. But once he moved back to California, I have no drum buddies down there.
You're on your own.
I am on my own, that's for sure. Obviously, if I ever moved, it wouldn't be a problem. I wouldn't even have to tell people, and no one would necessarily know. But yeah, I am very isolated. I'm also isolated from the local music scene. I'll meet some people and they'll go, "Oh, Orlando drummer, that's your thing. Well, you must know this guy, and this guy." It's like, dude, I haven't played a gig in years. I'm very unplugged from the local scene. Yeah, not much I can do about that, but I think part of my specific job is just being alone in a room creating videos, and that's just what the job is. So
Yeah.
I've learned to accept that, and trips like this make it a lot more tolerable. That's for sure.
Totally. So what's the one social media channel that you know you need to utilize better, but you've had a tough time getting a handle on, and why is that?
Probably Twitter. Yeah, I never really understood Twitter since the beginning. I'm like, wait a minute, so it's Facebook updates, but it's just words, and I can't type that many words. I'm like, okay.
I think there's a new handbook on Twitter that Donald Trump wrote that's coming out soon.
Oh, yeah. I would love to implement all of his ideas in my brand. That'd be great.
How to piss off everybody.
Yeah, so Twitter, that's a really obvious one, but really what my biggest focus on is YouTube. Just because I started on YouTube, that was my home base for a really long time, and that's where I got all of my initial fans and traffic, and I really got my name out there from YouTube. But since then, Instagram just became its own monster and surpassed what my YouTube channel is. But I still just feel like a YouTuber at heart, so I'd like to equalize the traffic and the numbers on those two platforms. So YouTube has been my heaviest focus for sure.
If you could build up your online drum lessons again, knowing what you know now, like you're starting over, but you've got all the knowledge that you have right now, what would you do differently?
Oh, that's really tough. I think I would just raise the bar for myself a lot higher. I think when I first started, one thing that I didn't realize was that your production levels are going to progressively get better as you do this whole thing. And what ends up happening is that some of your older content, even though you loved it at the time, it becomes a really poor example of what your brand is now. So if someone sees a video of mine from 5 years ago and they say like, oh, awesome lesson, it's like, oh, dude, but it wasn't. It was so bad. It was actually terrible. Like the production and the quality of just the education in general, how I was delivering the information. So I would try to don't even put out content until it's at a level that you think is going to have a lifespan on it. I used to put out content that had a lifespan of like a year. At the end of the year, well, okay, I uploaded it in 480p. So like when it's just that's useless after a year or two. So I think I would have tried to make all of my content a little bit more timeless by just starting with much higher production instead of just rushing to crank things out for the sake of just putting up something, just to have it.
Sure. Well, a minute ago you mentioned that you haven't gigged in years, and you might have your naysayers out there who would say, well, then what right does he have to teach me, blah, blah, blah.
A ton of them, yeah.
And it's okay, whatever, they can say that. The fact is you've done your fair share of gigging. You've just been so focused on your business that you haven't gigged because you've been doing your business.
Yeah.
Just like the guys that gig and then dabble in drum education, well, they're too busy gigging to really put their time into drum education.
There's plenty of those guys too.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you ever have the urge to collaborate with other musicians? And if so, how do you fulfill that need?
Definitely still have the urge. That's for sure. So I should say I did play one gig maybe a year and a half ago with an artist named Emily Kopp, who's actually based out right here in Nashville. So I did a gig with her, but it quickly reminded me why I had to stop gigging, because the amount of time it took for rehearsals and loading and driving and playing and then unloading and packing and then setting my kit up to mic it and record it the very next day for my normal job. It reminded me why I can't do that anymore. But whenever I do have that urge to collaborate, now the one cool outlet I have for that is actually the loops that we create for OrlandoDrummer.com. Myself and my audio engineer, Joe Hodge, him and I created the first 100, 120 play-alongs that we have. But we really, to be honest, we just got tired of writing a different song every week. We just ran out of ideas. So now what we're doing is we're collaborating with other artists, and working on getting their own loops on the site. So Eric Improda, fellow Meinl artist, he's in a band called Night Verses, and his guitar player Nick DePiro. He's done a really good loop pack for us as well. A good friend of mine, TJ Hartman, fantastic drummer. He's a multi-instrumentalist. He's done stuff for us. George Lindsay, another Meinl artist, he's done a loop pack for us as well. So nowadays that tends to be the more collaborative, projects. It doesn't mean we're all in a room playing music together necessarily. But yeah, that's about the extent of my musical collaboration. But it really is fun because it allows me to create music alongside other musicians, and that definitely has value to it for sure.
So we're going to kind of move from one subject to the other here. This one could be a little bit of a hornet's nest, but I want to hear an honest answer from you about it. So
You got it.
Is it frustrating to you being a part of the new guard of artists the manufacturers could work with for branding and marketing, only to be ignored by some of these companies? And why do you think some of these guys don't have a clue?
Yeah, I think that's a drum industry thing. I think, well, maybe it's a music industry thing. I don't totally know. I don't totally know. For example, why, let's say watch companies or clothing companies or microphone companies or companies that should have an interest in having their products viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. I don't really know why they're not interested, necessarily. And this isn't just a me thing. It's all over the place. You could talk to any content creator within the drum world, and they'll say the same thing, that there are just companies that just aren't on board with what you're doing, despite your ability to show their product or merchandise, whatever it is, to, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. What I think when I think about that whole problem, what I'm hopeful of is that people like myself, I've talked to drummers, a good friend of mine, Casey Cooper, we've talked about this, that hopefully we are the generation of people to make this way, way easier for the YouTube drummers, Instagram drummers, and content creators that aren't even born yet. Hopefully we're the guys that are showing some of these companies and manufacturers that, listen, this is what we can do. We have this audience. We're a new breed of entrepreneur. It's completely different. We're new types of musicians, and our goals and projects are completely different than the guys on these stadium tours. It's just not even kind of the same thing. And so even if it takes me the rest of my career to demonstrate that and build those relationships and change that problem or fix that problem, I'm happy to be part of the solution, even if that means that, a microphone company doesn't take interest in me until I'm in my 50s. Well, that's fine, because hopefully they'll get on board, and then someone in my shoes, in the year of 2040 won't have such a hard time getting involved with these companies. So I hope to be part of the solution. That's kind of where I find hope in that issue.
Hey, man, you still got Meinl. Come on.
I got Meinl, yeah.
So I got one last question for you here. Mm-hmm. What are your plans for the rest of 2018 and beyond?
The rest of 2018. The biggest thing in 2018 is going to be focusing on the website. It's definitely a year where I've got to really, really focus on the members area of my website specifically, just to improve that whole experience. Of all the students that I interact with and fans and people online, the most important people are, to me, are the people that came and pulled out a credit card or PayPal or whatever and committed to giving me money every month, just to access content that I've created. To me, that's as personal that's as personal and as important as a private student, right? You're number one to me. So improving their experience, even though a majority of my fan base might not really care about that, because a majority of my fan base certainly isn't, on my website. I'd have a lot more money if that was the case. But the people that are members of my website, I care about them more than anyone else. Those are my private students. So really improving their experience, that comes first for me. And second to that, my biggest concern or biggest thing that I like to address in my whole brand is really efficiency. I try to be as efficient as possible. Orlando Drummer is effectively a one-man show. I do film everything myself, play everything myself, I edit everything myself. But I do have an audio engineer, and I do have a web designer, so I have a small team of people. So with a group of people that small trying to do something so big, efficiency is key for me. So that could mean, hunting down different microphones or mixing boards or software or computers or you name it. It's not always gear, but just trying to be as efficient as possible so I can create content as quickly as possible. To me, that's just a long-term priority. So efficiency is huge for me.
Dude, I got to thank you so much for coming out here and doing this.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. This has been an awesome trip so far.
Yeah. So if this podcast comes out before the videos come out, anybody who's listening out there, we did a series of videos today here in Nashville and with Adam, and he came in and knocked it all out in a matter of a couple of hours. Talk about being super prepared.
Awesome. I try my best.
No, you did a great job.
These make me nervous, man. I don't play songs very often, so I went hard on these.
Yeah, no, you did great. And if this podcast comes out afterwards, then go to Meinl's YouTube channel and check out the videos as they come out with Adam. Yeah. Thank you, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for everybody checking this out. I really appreciate it.
All right, later.
Later.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.